Chapter 6. Mr. Vest drives out of the redwoods into a drizzling dawn, first iron gray and then somewhat paler, through coastal meadows, the same drear shades of metal as the sky, back onto Highway 101, into forests again, but of pine and spruce this time, out of Humboldt County into Del Norte County, ever more isolated terrain, eventually leaving 101 for a route that leads north-northeast. For the first part of the journey, he glances frequently at the rearview mirror, but the bedroom door remains closed, and the woman seems comfortable with the cadavers, or perhaps with her ignorance of them. In her retreat, the window is sealed off with plywood, and the light of dawn doesn't penetrate. Vess is a superb driver, and he makes excellent time, even in bad weather. We do best those things that we enjoy doing, which is why Mr. Vess is such a success at killing, and why he combines that enthusiasm with his love of driving, rather than restrict himself to prey within a reasonable radius of his home. Being on the open road with landscapes ever-changing, Edgeler Vess is the recipient of a constant influx of fresh visual sensation, and of course to one with his exquisitely refined senses and his ability to use them in a hologrammatic manner, a beautiful sight can also be a musical sound. A scent caught through an open window can be not solely an olfactory experience, but tactile too. The sweet fragrance of lilac like a woman's warm breath against his skin. Ensconced in the driver's seat of his motorhome, he travels through a rich sea of sensation that washes him the way water ceaselessly washes the hull of a deeply submerged submarine. Now he crosses into Oregon. The mountains come to him and pull him up into their fastness. The thickening stands of trees on the steep slopes are more gray than green in the stubborn rain, and the sight of them is like biting on a piece of ice, hard between his teeth, a slight but pleasant metallic taste, and a shattering coldness against his lips. He seldom glances at the rearview mirror anymore. The woman is a mystery, and mysteries of this nature can't be resolved by the sheer desire to resolve them. Ultimately, she will reveal herself, and the intensity of the experience will depend upon whatever purpose she has and what secrets she possesses. The waiting is delicious. Throughout the last few hours of the journey, Vess leaves the radio off, although not because he is afraid that music will mask the sounds of the woman stalking forward through the motorhome. In fact, he rarely listens to the radio while driving. In his memory is a vast library of recordings of the music that he likes best. The cries and squeals, the prayerful whispers, the shrieks as thin as paper cuts, the pulsatory sobbings for mercy, and the erotic inducements of final desperations. As he leaves the state highway for the country route, he recalls specifically Sarah Templeton in her shower stall. Her screams and her frantic gagging muffled by the green dishwashing sponge that he'd stuffed into her mouth and by the 2 strips of strapping tape that sealed her lips. Nothing on the radio, from Elton John to Garth Brooks to Pearl Jam to Sheryl Crow to Mozart or Beethoven for that matter, can compare to this interior entertainment. He follows the rain-swept Tulane County route to his private driveway. The entrance is securely gated and flanked by thickets of pines and brambly underbrush. The gate is made of tubular steel and barbed wire, set between stainless steel posts and concrete footings. It features an electric motor with remote operation, and when Mr. Vess pushes a button on the handheld control that he fishes from the console box, the barrier swings inward to the left in a satisfyingly stately manner. After driving the motorhome onto his property, he brakes to a stop once more, rolls down his window, holds out the control unit with the signal transmission window reversed in his grip. In his side view mirror, he watches as the gate closes. The driveway is nearly as long as that of the Templeton family's vineyards, as his property encompasses 54 acres that back up to a government-owned wilderness, which measures many miles on a side. He is not as well-to-do as the Templetons. Land here is far cheaper than the Napa Valley. In spite of the lack of paving, there is little mud and no real danger of the motorhome bogging down. The topsoil is shallow. The lane was graded down to the underlying shale. The way is a bit rough, but this is not, after all, New York City, New York. Vess drives up a modest incline between looming ranks of tall pines, spruces, scattered firs, and then the trees recede a little, and he crosses the bald hilltop. The road descends easily, in a graceful curve, into a small vale, with the house at the end and the hills rising behind in the sheeting rain and morning fog. His heart swells at the sight of home. Home is where his Ariel patiently awaits. The two-story house is small but solidly built of logs mortared with cement. The old logs are nearly black with layers of pitch, and time has darkened the cement to a tobacco brown, except for the tan and gray mottling of recent repairs. The house was constructed in the late 1920s by the owner of a family logging business, long before small operators were regulated out of such work and before the government declared the surrounding public lands off limits to timber harvesters. Electricity was brought in sometime during the 40s. Edgeler Vess has owned the house for 6 years. Upon purchasing the place, he rewired it, improved the plumbing, enlarged the second-floor bathroom. And entirely on his own, of course, he undertook extensive and secret remodeling work in the basement. To some, the property may seem isolated and conveniently far from a 7-Eleven or a multiplex cinema. But for Mr. Vess, whose pleasures would never be understood by most neighbors, relative isolation is the fundamental requirement when he is shopping for real estate. On a summer afternoon or evening, however, sitting in a bentwood rocker on the front porch, gazing out at the deep yard and the acres of wildflowers in the fields cleared by the logger and his sons, or staring at the great spread of stars, even the most meek and citified man would agree that isolation has its appeal. In good weather, Mr. Vess likes to take his dinner and a couple of beers on the porch when the mountain silences become boring. He allows himself to hear the voices of those who are buried in the field, their groveling and lamentations, the music that he prefers to any on the radio. In addition to the house, there is a small barn, not because the original owner of the property farmed any of the land that he cleared of trees, but because he kept horses. This second building is of traditional wood frame construction on a concrete footing and field stone stem wall. Wind, rain, and sun long ago laid down a silver patina on the durable cedar siding, which Vess finds lovely. Since he owns no horses, he uses the barn as a garage. Now, however, he pulls to a stop beside the house rather than continuing to the barn. The woman is in the motorhome, and he will soon need to deal with her. He prefers to park here, where he can watch her from the house and wait for developments. He glances at the rearview mirror. Still no sign of her. Switching off the engine, but not the windshield wipers, Vess waits for his guards to appear. The late March morning is animate with slanting rain and wind-shaken things, but nothing moves of its own deliberation. They may have been trained not to charge willy-nilly at approaching vehicles, and even to bide their time with intruders who are on foot, the better to lure them into a zone from which escape is impossible. These guards know that stealth is as important as savage fury, that the most successful assaults are preceded by calculated stillnesses to lull the quarry into a false confidence. Finally, the first black head appears, bullet sleek but for its pricked ears low to the ground at the rear corner of the house. The dog hesitates to reveal more of himself, surveying the scene to make sure that he understands what is happening. "Good fella," Vess whispers. At the nearest corner of the barn, between the cedar siding and the trunk of a winter bear maple, another dog appears. It is little more than a shadow in the rain. Vess wouldn't have noticed these sentries if he hadn't known to look for them. Their self-control is remarkable, a testament to his abilities as a trainer. 2 more dogs lurk somewhere, perhaps behind the motorhome or belly crawling through the shrubbery where he can't see them. They are all Dobermans, 5 and 6 years old, in their prime. Vess has not cropped their ears or bobbed their tails, as is usually done with Dobermans, for he has an affinity for nature's predators. He is able to perceive the world to a degree as he believes that animals perceive it. The elemental nature of their view, their needs, the importance of raw sensation, they have a kinship. The dog by the corner of the house slinks into the open, and the dog of the barn emerges from beneath the black-limbed maple. A third Doberman rises from behind the massive and half-petrified stump of a long-vanquished cedar in the side yard, around which has grown a tangled mass of holly. The motorhome is familiar to them. Their vision, while not their strongest suit, is probably sufficient to allow them to recognize him through the windshield. With a sense of smell 20,000 times more acute than that of the average human being, they no doubt detect his scent even through the rain and even though he is inside the motorhome. Yet they don't wag their tails or in any way exhibit pleasure because they are still on duty. The fourth dog remains hidden, but these three drift warily toward him through the rain and the mist. Their heads are lifted, pointy ears flicked up and forward. In their disciplined silence and indifference to the storm, they remind him of the herd of elk in the redwood grove the previous night, eerily intent. The big difference, of course, is that these creatures, if confronted by anyone other than their beloved master, would not respond with the timidity of elk, but would tear the throat out of that luckless person. Although she would not have believed it possible, China had been lulled into sleep by the hum of the tires and the motion of the motorhome. Her dreams were of strange houses in which the geometry of the rooms was ever-changing and bizarre. Something eager and hungry lived within the walls, and at night it spoke to her through vent grills and electrical outlets, whispering its needs. The brakes woke her. Immediately she realized that the motorhome had come to a full halt once before and then had started up again only moments ago. She had dozed through that first stop, disturbed in her sleep but not fully awakened. Now, although they were on the move again and the killer was obviously still behind the steering wheel, China grabbed the revolver from the floor beside her, scrambled to her feet, and stood with her back to the wall, tense and alert. From the tilt of the floor and the laboring sound of the engine, she knew that they were climbing a hill. Then they reached the top and headed downward. Soon they stopped again, and at last the engine cut out. The rain was the only sound. She waited for footsteps. Although she knew that she was awake, she seemed to be in a dream, rigid in darkness, with the incessant rain like whispering in the walls. Mr. Vest takes the time to put on his raincoat and to slip his Heckler & Koch P7 into one pocket. He removes the Mossberg shotgun from the cabinet in the kitchenette, in case the woman searches the place after he leaves. He switches off the lights. When he descends from the motorhome, heedless of the cold rain, the three big dogs come to him, and then the fourth from behind the vehicle. All are quivering with excitement at his return, but still holding themselves in check, not wanting to be thought derelict in their duty. Just before departing on this expedition, Mr. Vest had placed the Dobermans on attack status by speaking the name Nietzsche. They will remain primed to kill anyone who walks onto the property until he speaks the name Seuss, whereupon they will be as affable as any other group of sociable mutts, except, of course, if anyone unwisely threatens their master. After propping his shotgun against the side of the motorhome, he holds his hands out to the dogs. They eagerly crowd around to sniff his fingers, sniffing, panting, licking. Yes, they have missed him so very much. He squats on his haunches, coming down to their level, and now their delight is uncontainable. Their ears twitch, the shivers of pure pleasure pass visibly along their lean flanks, and they whine softly with sheer happiness, jealously pressing all at once at him to be touched, patted, scratched. They live in an enormous kennel against the back of the barn, which they can enter and leave at will. It is electrically heated during cold weather to ensure their comfort and their continued good health. Hi there, Munster. How you doing, Liederkrantz? Tilsiter boy, you look like one mean son of a bitch. Hey, Limburger, are you a good boy? Are you my good boy? Each at the mention of his name is filled with such joy that he would roll on his back and bare his belly and paw the air and grin at death, if he weren't still on duty. Part of the fun for Vest is watching the struggle between training and nature in each animal, a sweet agony that makes two of them pee in nervous frustration. Mr. Vest has rigged electrically operated dispensers inside the kennel, which in his absence automatically pay out measured portions of food for each Doberman. The system clock has a backup battery to continue timing meals, even during a power failure of short duration. In the event of a long-term loss of power, the dogs can always resort to hunting for their sustenance. The surrounding meadows are full of field mice and rabbits and squirrels, and the Dobermans are fierce predators. Their communal water trough is fed by a drip line, but if it should ever cease to function, they can find their way to a nearby spring that runs through the property. Most of Mr. Vess's expeditions are 3-day weekends, rarely as long as 5 days, and the dogs have a 10-day food supply without counting rabbits, mice, and squirrels. They constitute an efficient and reliable security system, never shorten any circuit, never failed motion detector, never corroded magnetic contact, and never a false alarm. Oh, and how these dogs love him, how unreservedly and loyally, as no memory chips and wires and cameras and infrared heat sensors ever could. They smell the bloodstains on his jeans and denim jacket, and they push their sleek heads under his open raincoat, ears laid back, sniffing eagerly now, detecting not merely the blood, but the lingering stench of terror that his victims exuded when in his hands, their pain, their helplessness, the sex that he had with the one named Laura. This melange of pungent odors not only excites the dogs, but increases their respect for Vess. They have been taught to kill not merely in self-defense, not just for food, with a degree of iron self-control. They have been taught to kill for the sheer savage pleasure of it, to please their master. They are acutely aware that their master can match their savagery, and unlike them, he has never needed to be taught. Their high regard for Edgeler Vess soars higher, and they mew softly and quiver and roll their soulful eyes at him in worshipful awe. Mr. Vess gets to his feet. He picks up the shotgun and slams the door of the motorhome. The dogs spring to his side, jostling one another to be close to him, alertly surveying the rain-shrouded day for any threat to their master. Quietly, so the woman inside cannot possibly hear the word he says, Zeus. The dogs freeze, looking up at him, heads cocked. Zeus, he repeats. The 4 Dobermans are no longer on attack status and will not automatically tear to pieces anyone who enters the property. They shake themselves as if casting off tension, then pat around in a vaguely bewildered fashion, sniffing at the grass and at the front tires of the motorhome. They are like mafia hitmen who, following their own executions, have now regained a baffled self-awareness after being reincarnated, only to discover that they are accountants in this new life. If any visitor were to attempt to harm their master, of course they would leap to his defense, whether or not he had time to shout the word Nietzsche. The result wouldn't be pretty. They are trained first to tear out the throat, then they will bite the face to effect maximum terror and pain, go for the eyes, the nose, the lips, then the crotch, then the belly. They won't kill and turn at once away. They will be busy for a while with their quarry after they have brought it down, until no doubt exists that they have done their job. Even a man with a shotgun could not take out all of them before at least one managed to sink its teeth into his throat. Gunfire will not drive them away or even make them flinch. Nothing can frighten them. Most likely, the hypothetical man with the shotgun would be able to wipe out only 2 before the remaining pair overwhelmed him. Crib, says Mr. Vess. The single word instructs the dogs to go to their kennel, and they take off as one, sprinting toward the barn. Still, they do not bark, for he has schooled them in silence. Ordinarily, he would allow them to stay with him and enjoy his company and spend the day in his house with him and even pile up like a black and tan quilt with him as he sleeps away the afternoon. He would cuddle them and coo to them, for they have been, after all, such good dogs. They deserve their reward. The woman in the red sweater, however, prevents Mr. Vess from dealing with the dogs as he usually would. If they are a visible presence, they will inhibit her, and she may cower inside the motorhome, afraid to exit. The woman must be given enough freedom to act, or at least the illusion of freedom. He's curious to see what she will do. She must have a purpose, some motivation for the strange things that she has done thus far. Everyone has a purpose. Mr. Vess's purpose is to satisfy all appetites as they arise, to seek ever more outrageous experience, to immerse himself deeply in sensation. Whatever the woman believes her purpose to be, Vess knows that in the end her true purpose will be to serve him. She is a glorious variety of powerful and exquisite sensations in human skin. packaged solely for his enjoyment, rather like a Hershey bar in its brown and silver wrapper, or a Slim Jim sausage snug in its plastic tube. The last of the racing Dobermans vanishes behind the barn to the kennel. Mr. Vest walks through the soggy grass to the old log house and climbs a set of fieldstone steps to the front porch. Although he carries the pistol-grip 12-gauge Mossberg, he makes an effort to appear otherwise nonchalant, in case the woman has come forward from the bedroom at the rear of the motorhome to watch him through a window. The bentwood rocker has been stored away until spring. Trailing silvery slime across the wet floorboards of the porch, several early spring snails test the air with their semi-transparent gelatinous feelers, hauling their spiral shells on strange quests. Mr. Vest is careful to step around them. A mobile hangs at one corner of the porch from the fascia board at the edge of the shingle roof. It is made of 28 white seashells, all quite small, some with lovely pink interiors. Most are spiral in form, and all are relatively exotic. The mobile does not make a good wind chime because most of the notes that it strikes are flat. It greets him with a flurry of atonal clinking, but he smiles because it has, well, not sentimental, but at least nostalgic value to him. This fine piece of folk craft once belonged to a young woman who lived in a suburb of Seattle, Washington. She had been an attorney about 32, sufficiently successful to live alone in her own house in an upscale neighborhood. For a person tough enough to thrive in the combative legal profession, this woman had kept a surprisingly frilly, in fact, downright girlish bedroom. A 4-poster bed with a pink canopy trimmed with lace and fringe, rose-patterned bedspread and starched dust ruffles, a big collection of teddy bears, paintings of English cottages hung with morning glory vines and surrounded by lush primrose gardens, and several seashell mobiles. He had done exciting things to her in that bedroom. Then he had taken her away in the motorhome to places remote enough to allow him to perform other acts even more exciting. She had asked why, and he had answered, because this is what I do. That was all the truth and all the reason of him. Mr. Vest can't recall her name, though he fondly remembers many things about her. Parts of her were as pink and smooth and lovely as the insides of some of these dangling seashells. He has an especially vivid mental image of her small hands, almost as slender and delicate as those of a child. He had been fascinated by her hands, enchanted. He had never sensed anyone's vulnerability so intensely as he'd sensed hers when he held her small, trembling but strong hand in his. Oh, he had been like a swooning schoolboy with her hands. When he had hung the mobile on the porch as a memento of the attorney, he had added one item. It dangles now on a piece of green string, her slender index finger reduced to bare bones but still undeniably elegant, the 3 phalanges from tip to the base knuckle clinking against the little conch shells, and miniature bivalve fans and trumpet shells and tiny spirals similar to the world homes of snails. Clink, 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 clink. He unlocks the front door and enters the house. He closes but does not lock the door behind him, allowing the woman to have access if she chooses to take it. Who knows what she will choose to do? Already her behavior is as astonishing as it is mysterious. She excites him. Vest turns from the shadowy front room to the narrow enclosed stairs immediately to his left. He quickly climbs the steps 2 at a time, one hand on the oak banister, to the 2nd floor. A short hallway serves 2 bedrooms and a bath. His room is to the left. In his private chamber, he drops the Mossberg on the bed and crosses to the south-facing window, which is covered by a blue drape with black outlining. He doesn't need to draw the drape aside to see the motorhome on the driveway below. The 2 pleated panels of fabric don't quite meet, and when he puts his eye to the 2-inch gap, he has a clear view of the entire vehicle. Unless she slipped out of the motorhome immediately behind him, which is highly doubtful, the woman is still inside. He can see down through the windshield at an angle into the pilot's and co-pilot's seats, and she has not advanced to either. He takes the pistol from his pocket and puts it on the dresser. He shrugs out of the raincoat and tosses it atop the Chanel spread on the neatly made bed. When he checks at the window again, there is as yet no sign of the mystery woman at the motorhome below. He hurries into the hallway to the bathroom. White tile, white paint, white tub, white sink, white toilet, polished brass fixtures with white ceramic knobs. Everything gleams. Not a single smudge mars the mirror. Mr. Vest likes a bright, clean bathroom. For a while, lifetimes ago, he lived with his grandmother in Chicago, and she was incapable of keeping a bathroom clean enough to meet his standards. Finally, exasperated beyond endurance, he killed the old bitch. He'd been 11 when he put the knife in her. Now, he reaches behind the shower curtain and cranks the cold faucet all the way open. He isn't actually going to take a shower, so there's no point in wasting hot water. He quickly adjusts the shower head until the spray is as heavy as it gets. The water pounds down into the fiberglass tub, filling the bathroom with thunder. He knows from experience that the sound carries throughout the small house, even with rain on the roof. This is much louder than the sound of the shower in Sarah Templeton's bedroom, and it will be heard downstairs. On a wall shelf above the toilet is a clock radio. He switches it on and adjusts the volume. The radio is set to a Portland station featuring 24-hour-a-day news. Ordinarily, when bathing and attending to his toilet, Mr. Vest likes to listen to the news. Not because he has any interest in the latest political or cultural developments, but because these days the news is largely about people maiming and killing one another. War, terrorism, rape, assault, murder. And when people can't kill one another in sufficient numbers to keep the reporters busy, nature always saves the day with a tornado, a hurricane, a big earthquake, or an outbreak of flesh-eating bacteria. Sometimes listening to the news and letting the various reports spark fond memories of his own homicidal exploits, he realizes that he himself is also a force of nature, a hurricane, a lightning storm, a planet-smashing asteroid hurtling through the void, the distillate of all human ferocity in a single body. Elemental power. The thought pleases him. Now, however, news will not set the stage properly. Hastily, he turns the tuning knob until he finds a station playing music. Take the A Train by Duke Ellington. Perfect. The big band sound brings to his mind's eye an image of light flaring off cut crystal and luminous bubbles rising in a champagne glass. And it reminds him of the smell of fresh cut limes, lemons. He can feel the notes in the air. Some shimmering, bursting like bubbles, and others bouncing off him like hundreds of little rubber balls, and some like wind-blown leaves crisp with autumn. A very tactile music, exuberant and exhilarating. The woman will be subtly lured by the swing beat. It will be difficult for her to really believe, that anything bad can happen to her with such music as background. Perfect. He hurries back to his bedroom, to the window, having been away from it no more than a minute. Rain snaps against the glass, streams. On the driveway below, the motorhome stands as before. The woman still must be inside. She probably won't just burst out of the vehicle and run pell-mell. She's likely to exit warily, hesitant on both sides of the door. Although there might have been time for her to get out of the motorhome while Mr. Vest was in the bathroom, she'd almost certainly be huddling against it, getting her bearings, assessing the situation. From this high vantage point, he can see around most of the vehicle, with the exception of blind spots toward the rear, on the port side, and at the very back, and the woman is not in sight. "Ready when you are, Miss Desmond," he says, referring to the Gloria Swanson character in Sunset Boulevard. That movie had had a great effect on him when he'd first seen it on television. He'd been 13, a year out of counseling for the murder of his grandmother. On one level, he had known that Norma Desmond was supposed to be the tragic villain of the piece, that the writer and director intended for her to fulfill that role, but he had admired her, loved her. Her selfishness was thrilling, her self-absorption heroic. She was the truest character he had ever seen in a movie. This was what people were actually like, under the pretense and hypocrisy, under all the crap about love, compassion, altruism. They were all like Norma Desmond, but couldn't admit it to themselves. Norma didn't give a shit about the rest of the world, and she bent everyone to her iron will, even when she was no longer young or beautiful or famous, and when she couldn't bend William Holden's character as far as she wanted, she just boldly picked up a gun and shot him, which was so powerful, so audacious. that young Edgeler had been too excited to sleep that night. He had lain awake, wondering what it would be like to encounter a woman as superior and genuine as Norma Desmond, and then to break her, kill her, take all the strength of her selfishness and make it his own. Maybe this mystery woman is a little bit like Norma Desmond. She's bold, sure enough. He can't figure what the hell she's doing, what she's after, and when he understands her motivation, maybe she won't be anything like Norma Desmond, but at least she's already something new and interesting in his experience. The rain, the wind, the motorhome. Take the A train has given way to a string of pearls. Murmuring softly against the blue drapes, Mr. Vest says, "Ready when you are." After the killer had gotten out of the motorhome and slammed the door, China had waited in the dark bedroom for a long while in the one-note lullaby of rain. She had told herself that she was being prudent. Listen, wait, be sure, absolutely sure. But then she had been forced to admit that she had lost her nerve. Although she had mostly dried out during the ride north from Humboldt County, she was still cold, and the source of her chills was the ice of doubt in her guts. The eater of spiders was gone, and to China, even remaining in blackness with 2 dead bodies was far preferable to going outside where she might encounter him again. She knew that he would be back, that this bedroom was not in fact a safe place, but for a while, what she knew was overruled by what she felt. When at last she broke her paralysis, she moved with reckless abandon, as though any hesitation would result in another and worse paralysis, which she would be unable to overcome. She yanked open the bedroom door, plunged into the hall, with the revolver held in front of her, because maybe the murderous bastard hadn't gotten out after all, and she went all the way forward past the bathroom and through the dining area and into the lounge, where she stepped a few feet back from the driver's seat. The only light was a bleak gray haze that came through the skylight in the hall behind her and through the windshield ahead. But she could see that the killer wasn't here. She was alone. Outside, directly ahead of the motorhome, lay a sodden yard, a few dripping trees, and a rough driveway leading to a weathered barn. China moved to a starboard window, cautiously peeled back one corner of the greasy drape, and saw a log house about 20 feet away. Mottled with time and many coats of creosote, streaming with rain, the walls glistened like dark snakeskin. Although she had no way of being certain, she assumed that it was the killer's house. He had told the men in the service station that he was going home after his hunting trip, and everything he had told them had sounded to her like the truth, including and especially the taunts about young Ariel. The killer must be inside. China went forward again and leaned over the driver's seat to look at the ignition. The keys weren't there. They weren't in the console box either. She slipped into the co-pilot's seat, feeling frightfully exposed in spite of the blurring rain that washed down the windows. She could find nothing in the console box, in the shallow glove box, in either door pouch, or under either front seat that revealed the name of the owner or anything else about him. He would be returning soon. For some demented reason, he had gone to a lot of trouble and taken risks to bring the cadavers, and most likely he would not leave them in the motorhome for long. The obscuring rain made it difficult for her to be sure, but she thought that the drapes were drawn to the first-floor windows on the side of the house. Consequently, the killer would not casually glance out and spot her when she stepped from the motorhome. She couldn't see the pair of second-floor windows half as well as those lower down, but they also might be draped. She cracked open the door, and a cold knife of wind thrust at her through the gap. She got out and closed the door behind her as quietly as possible. The sky was low and turbulent. Forested hills rose rank after rank behind the house, vanishing into the pearly mist. China sensed mountains looming above the hills in the overcast. They would still be capped with snow this early in the spring. She hurried to the flagstone steps and went up onto the porch out of the rain, but it was coming down so hard that already she was soaked again. She stood with her back to the rough wall. Windows flanked the front door, and the drapes were drawn behind the nearer of the two. Music inside, swing music. She stared out at the meadows along the lane that led from the house to the top of a low hill, and thence out of sight. Perhaps beyond the hill, other houses stood along that unpaved track where she would find people who could help her. But who had ever helped her before all these long years? She remembered the 2 brief stops that had awakened her, and she suspected that the motorhome had passed through a gate. Nevertheless, even if this was a private driveway, it would lead sooner or later to a public road where she would find assistance from residents or passing motorists. The top of the hill was approximately a quarter of a mile from the house. This was a lot of open ground to cover before she would be out of sight. If he saw her, he would probably be able to chase her down before she got away. And she still didn't know that this was his house. Even if it was his house, she couldn't be sure that this was where he kept Ariel. If China brought back the authorities and Ariel wasn't here, then the killer might never tell them where to find the girl. She had to be sure that Ariel was in the basement. But if the girl was here, then when China came back with the cops, the killer might barricade himself in the house. It would take a SWAT team to pry him out of the place, and before they got to him, he might kill Ariel and commit suicide. In fact, that was almost certainly how it would play out as soon as any cops showed up. He would know that his freedom was at an end, that his games were over, that he would have no more fun, and all he would see available to him was one last apocalyptic celebration of madness. China couldn't bear to lose this imperiled girl so soon after losing Laura, failing Laura, intolerable. She couldn't keep failing people, as all her life others had failed her. Meaning wasn't to be found in psychology classes and textbooks, but in caring, in hard sacrifice, in faith, in action. She didn't want to take these risks. She wanted to live, but for someone other than herself. At least now she had a gun and the advantage of surprise. Earlier at the Templeton house and in the motorhome, and then at the service station, she'd also had the advantage of surprise, but she hadn't been in possession of the revolver. She realized that she was arguing herself into taking the most dangerous course of action open to her, making excuses for going into the house. Going into the house was obviously crazy. Jesus, a total crazy move. Jesus. But she was striving hard to rationalize it because she had already made up her mind that this was what she was going to do. Coming out of the motorhome, the woman has a gun in her right hand. It looks as if it might be a .38, perhaps a Chief Special. This is a popular weapon with some cops, but this woman doesn't move like a cop, doesn't handle the weapon as a cop would. Although clearly she is somewhat comfortable with a gun. No, she's definitely not an officer of the law. Something else, something weird. Mr. Best has never been so intrigued by anyone as he is by this spunky little lady, this mysterious adventurer. She's a real treat. The moment she sprints from the motorhome to the house and out of sight, Best moves from the window on the south wall of his bedroom to the window on the east wall. It is also covered by a blue drape, which he parts. No sign of her. He waits, holding his breath, but she doesn't head east along the lane. After half a minute or so, he knows that she isn't going to run. If she had taken off, she would have sorely disappointed him. He doesn't think of her as a person who would run. She is bold. He wants her to be bold. Had she run, he would have sent the dogs after her, not with instructions to kill, but merely to detain. Then he would have retrieved her to question her at his leisure. But she is coming to him. For whatever unimaginable reason, she will follow him into the house, with her revolver. He will need to be cautious, but oh, what fun he's having. Her gun only makes the game more intense. The front porch is immediately below this window, but he isn't able to see it because of the overhanging roof. The mystery woman is somewhere on the porch. He can feel her close, perhaps directly under him. He retrieves his pistol from the nightstand and glides quietly across the wall-to-wall carpet into the open doorway. He steps into the hall and quickly to the head of the enclosed stairs, where he stops. He can see only the landing below, not the living room, but he listens. If she opens the front door, he will know because one of the hinges makes a dry, ratcheting sound. It's not a loud noise, but it is distinctive. Because he's listening specifically for that corroded hinge, not even the drumming of the rain on the roof, the pounding of the shower into the bathtub, and In the Mood on the radio can entirely mask the sound. crazy, but she was going to do it for Ariel, for Laura, but also for herself. Maybe most of all for herself. After all these years under beds, in closets, in attic shadows, no more hiding. After all these years of getting by, keeping her head down, drawing no attention to herself, suddenly she had to do something or explode. She'd been living in a prison since the day she'd been born, even after leaving her mother, a prison of fear and shame and lowered expectations. And she'd been so accustomed to her circumscribed life that she had not recognized the bars. Now, righteous rage released her, and she was crazy with freedom. The chilly wind kicked up, and shatters of rain blasted under the porch roof. Seashell wind chimes clattered in irritation of flat notes. China eased past the window, trying to avoid several snails on the porch floor. The drapes remained tightly shut. The front door was closed but unlocked. She slowly pushed it inward. One hinge rasped. The big band tune finished with a flourish, and at once two voices arose from deeper in the house. China froze on the threshold, but then she realized that she was listening to an advertisement. The music had been coming from a radio. It was possible that the killer shared the house with someone other than Ariel, and other than the procession of victims or dead bodies brought back from his road trips. China couldn't conceive of his having a family, a wife and children, a psychotic Brady Bunch waiting for him. But there were rare cases on record of homicidal sociopaths working together, like the two men who proved to be the Hillside Strangler in Los Angeles a couple of decades ago. Voices on a radio, however, were no threat. With the revolver held in front of her, she went inside. The incoming wind whistled into the house, rattling a wobbly lampshade and threatening to betray her, so she closed the door. The radio voices came down an enclosed stairwell to her left. She kept one eye on the doorless opening at the foot of those steps, in case more than voices descended. The front room on the ground floor ran the entire width of the small house, and although it was illuminated only by the gray light from the windows, it was nothing like what she had expected to find. There were hunter green leather armchairs with footstools, a tartan-plaid sofa on large ball feet, rustic oak end tables, and a section of bookshelves that held perhaps 300 volumes. On the hearth of the big River Rock fireplace were gleaming brass andirons, and on the mantel was an old clock with two bronze stags rearing up on their hind legs. The decor was thoroughly but not aggressively masculine. No glassily staring deer or bear heads on the walls. No hunting prints, no rifles on display, just cozy and comfortable. Where she had been expecting pervasive clutter as evidence of his seriously disordered mind, there was neatness. Instead of filth, cleanliness. Even in the shadows, China could see that the room was well dusted and swept. Rather than being burdened with the stench of death, the house was redolent of lemon oil, furniture polish, and a subtle pine-scented air freshener, as well as the faint and pleasant smell of char from the fireplace. Selling H&R Block's tax services and then donuts, the radio voices bounced with enthusiasm down the stairs. The killer had it cranked up too loud. The volume level seemed wrong to China, as if he was trying to mask other sounds. There was another sound, similar to but different from the rain, and after a moment she recognized it. A shower. That was why he had set the radio so loud. He was listening to the music while taking a shower. She was in luck. As long as the killer was in the shower, she could search for Ariel without the risk of being discovered. China hurriedly crossed the front room to a half-open door, went through and found a kitchen. Canary yellow ceramic tile with knotty pine cabinets. On the floor, gray vinyl tiles speckled with yellow and green and red, well scrubbed, everything in its place. She was soaked, rain dripping off her hair and still seeping from her jeans onto the clean floor. Taped to the side of the refrigerator was a calendar already turned forward to April, with a color photograph that showed one eye and one black kitten, both with dazzling green eyes, peering out from a huge spray of lilies. The normality of the house terrified her. The gleaming surfaces, the tidiness, the homey touches, the sense that a person lived here who might walk in daylight on any street and pass for human, in spite of the atrocities that he had committed. Don't think about it. Keep moving. Safety and movement. She went past the rear door, through the 4 glass panes in the upper half. She saw a back porch, a green yard, a couple of big trees, and the barn. Without any architectural division, the kitchen opened into the dining area, and the combined space was probably 2/3 the width of the house. The round dinette table was dark pine, supported by a thick central drum rather than legs. The 4 heavy pine captain's chairs featured tie-on back-end seat cushions. Upstairs, the music started again, but it was softer in the kitchen than in the front room. If she had been an aficionado of big band music, however, she would have been able to recognize the tune from here. The noise of the running shower was more apparent in the kitchen than in the living room because the pipes were channeled through the rear wall of the old house. Water being drawn upward to the bathroom made an urgent, hollow, rushing sound through copper. Furthermore, the pipe wasn't tied down and insulated as well as it ought to have been, and at some point along its course, it vibrated against a wall stud, rapid knocking behind plasterboard, tada-tada-tada-tada-tada. If that noise abruptly stopped, she would know that her safe time in the house was limited. In the subsequent silence, she could count on no more than a minute or 2 of grace while he toweled off. Therefore, he might show up anywhere. China looked around for a telephone, but saw only a wall jack into which one could be plugged. If there had been a phone, she might have paused to call 911, supposing there was 911 service out here in, well, wherever the hell they were, these boondocks. Knowing that help was on the way would have made the remainder of the search less nerve-wracking. At the north end of the dining area was another door. Although the killer was in the shower upstairs, she turned the knob as quietly as she could and crossed the threshold with caution. Beyond lay a combination laundry and storage room, a washer, an electric dryer, boxes and bottles of laundry supplies were stored in an orderly fashion on 2 open shelves, and the air smelled like detergent and bleach. The rush of water and the knocking pipe were even louder here than they had been in the kitchen. To the left, past the washer and dryer, was another door, rough pine, painted lime green. She opened it and saw stairs leading down to a black cellar, and her heart began to beat faster. "Ariel," she said softly, but there was no answer, because she had spoken more to herself than to the girl. No windows at all below, not even a turbid leak of gray stormlight seeping through narrow casements or screen ventilation cutouts, dungeon dark. But if the bastard was keeping a girl down there, how odd that he wouldn't have added a lock to this upper door. It offered only the spring latch that retracted with a twist of the knob, not a real lock of any kind. The captive might be sealed in a windowless room, deep below, of course, or even manacled. Ariel might have no hope of reaching these stairs and this upper door, even if left alone for days to worry at her restraints, which would explain why the killer was confident that one more barrier to her flight wasn't necessary, even when he was away from home. Nevertheless, it seemed peculiar that he wouldn't be concerned about a thief breaking into the house when he was gone, descending to the cellar and inadvertently discovering the imprisoned girl. Considering the obvious age of the structure, its rusticity, and the lack of any apparent alarm keypads, China doubted that the house had a security system. The killer, with all his secrets, ought to have installed a steel door to the cellar with locks as impregnable as those on a bank vault. The lack of special security might mean that the girl Ariel was not here. China didn't want to dwell on that possibility. She had to find Ariel. Leaning through the doorway, she felt along the stairwell wall for the switch and snapped it up. Lights came on both at the upper landing and in the basement. The bare concrete steps, a single flight, were steep. They appeared to be much newer than the house itself, perhaps even a relatively recent addition. The high-velocity surge of water through plumbing and the hard wrapping of the loose pipe in the wall told her that the killer was still busy in the bathroom above, scrubbing away all traces of his crimes. Tada-tada-tada. Louder than before, but still in a whisper, she said, "Ariel." Out of the still air below, no response. Louder, "Ariel." Nothing. China didn't want to go down into this windowless pit with no way out except the stairs, even with the lockless door above, but she couldn't think of any way to avoid the descent, not if she was to learn for sure whether Ariel was here. Ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. It always came to this. Even with childhood long past and being grown up and everything supposedly in control, everything supposedly all right, even then it still came to this. Alone, dizzy with fear, alone, down into a bleak, dark, cramped place, no exits, sustained only by mad hope, with the world indifferent, no one to wonder about her or care where she might have gone. Listening intently for the slightest change in the sound of the rushing water and the vibrating pipe, China went down one step at a time, her left hand on the iron railing. The gun was extended in her right hand. She was clenching it so fiercely that her knuckles ached. China Shepherd, untouched and alive, she said shakily. China Shepherd, untouched and alive. Halfway down the stairs, she glanced back and up. The landing seemed a quarter of a mile above her, as far away as the top of the knoll had seemed from the front porch of the house. Alice down the rabbit hole into a madness without tea parties. At the open doorway between the in-kitchen dining area and the laundry room, Mr. Etchler-Vest hears the mystery woman call to Ariel. She's only a few feet away from him, around the corner past the washer and the dryer, so there can be no mistake about what name she speaks. Ariel. Stupefied, he stands blinking and open-mouthed in the fragrance of laundry detergent and in the wall-muffled rattle of copper pipes, with her voice echoing in memory. There is no way for her to know about Ariel, yet she calls to the girl again, louder than before. Mr. Vest suddenly feels terribly violated, oppressed, observed. He glances back at the windows in the dining area and the kitchen, expecting to discover the radiant faces of accusing strangers pressed to those panes. He sees only the rain and the drowned gray light, but he is still anguished. This is not fun any longer, not fun at all. The mystery is too deep and alarming. It is as if this woman didn't come to him out of that Honda, but came through an invisible barrier between dimensions, one out of some world beyond this one, from which she has been secretly watching him. The flavor is distinctly supernatural, the texture otherworldly, and now the laundry detergent smells like burning incense, and the cloying air seems thick with unseen presences. Fearful and plagued by doubt, unaccustomed to both of those emotions, Mr. Vest steps into the laundry room, raising the Heckler & Koch P7. His finger wraps the trigger, already beginning to squeeze off a shot. The cellar door stands open, the stairwell light is on, the woman is not in sight. He eases off the trigger without firing. On those infrequent occasions when he has guests to the house, to dinner, or for a business meeting, he always leaves a Doberman in the laundry room. The dog lies in here silent and dozing, but if anyone other than Vest were to enter, the dog would bark and snarl and drive him backward. When the master is away, Dobermans vigilantly patrol the entire property, and no one has a hope of getting into the house itself, let alone into the cellar. Mr. Vest has never put a lock on the door to these cellar steps because he is concerned that it might accidentally trip, imprisoning him down there when he is at play and unawares. With the key-operated deadbolt, of course, this catastrophe could never happen. He himself is incapable of imagining how any such mechanism could malfunction and trap him. Nevertheless, he's too concerned about the prospect to take the risk. Over the years, he has seen coincidence at work in the world and people perishing because of it. One late June afternoon near dusk, as Mr. Vest was driving to Reno, Nevada on Interstate 80, a young blonde in a Mustang convertible had passed his motorhome. She was wearing white shorts and a white blouse, and her long hair streamed red gold in the twilight wind. Filled with an instant and powerful need to smash her beautiful face, he had pressed the motorhome to its limits to keep her swifter Mustang in sight, but his quest had seemed doomed. As the highway rose into the Sierras, the speed of the motorhome had fallen and the Mustang had pulled away. Even if he had been able to draw close to the woman, the traffic had been too heavy, too many witnesses, for him to try anything as bold as forcing her off the highway. Then one of the tires on the Mustang had blown. Traveling at such high speed, she nearly spun out, nearly rolled, swerving from lane to lane. blue smoke pouring off the tires, but then she got control and pulled the car off the road onto the shoulder. Mr. Vess had stopped to assist her. She had been grateful for his offer of help, smiling and pleasantly shy. A nice girl with a 1-inch gold cross on a chain around her neck, and later she had wept so bitterly and struggled so excitingly to resist surrendering her beauty, to turn her face away from his various sharp instruments, just a high-spirited young woman full of life, and on the way to Reno until coincidence gave her to him. And if a blown tire, why not a malfunctioning lock? If coincidence can give, it can take. Mr. Vess lives with intensity, but not without caution. Now this woman calling for Ariel has come into his life like a blown tire. Suddenly he's not sure if she is a gift to him or he to her. Remembering her revolver and wishing for Dobermans, he glides across the laundry room to the cellar door. The woman's voice rises from the stairs below. China Shepherd, untouched and alive. The words are so strange, the meaning so mysterious, that they seem to be an incantation encoded in cryptic. Confirming that perception, the woman repeats herself as though she is chanting, China Shepherd, untouched and alive. Though Vess is not usually superstitious, he experiences a heightened sense of the supernatural beyond anything he's felt thus far. His scalp prickles and the flesh on the nape of his neck crawls and his hand tightens on the pistol. After hesitation, he leans through the open door and looks down the cellar steps. The woman is only a few steps from the bottom. She's got one hand on the railing, the revolver held out in front of her in the other hand. Not a cop, an amateur. Nonetheless, she might be Mr. Vess's blown tire, and he's jumpy, twitchy, still extremely curious about her, but prepared to put his safety ahead of his curiosity. He eases through the doorway onto the upper landing. As close as she is, she does not hear him because all is concrete, nothing a creak. He aims his pistol at the center of her back. The first shot will catapult her off her feet and send her flying with her arms spread toward the basement below. And the second shot will take her as she is in flight. Then he'll race down the stairs behind her, firing the third and fourth rounds, hitting her in the legs if possible. He'll drop on top of her, press the muzzle into the back of her head, and then when he's totally in control of her, dominant, he can decide whether she's still a threat or not, whether he can risk questioning her, or whether she's so dangerous that nothing will do but to put a couple of rounds in her brain. As the woman passes under the light near the foot of the stairs, Mr. Vess gets a better look at her revolver. It is indeed a Smith & Wesson .38 Chief Special, as he had thought earlier when he had seen it from the second-floor bedroom window. But suddenly the make and model of the weapon have electrifying meaning for him. He smells the Slim Jim sausage. He remembers liquid night eyes widening in shocked terror and despair. He has seen 2 of these guns in the past several hours. The first belonged to the young Asian gentleman at the service station who drew it from under the counter in self-defense, but never had the opportunity to fire. Although the Chief Special is a popular revolver, it is not so universally admired that one sees it everywhere in use. Edgar Vess knows with the certainty of a fox on the scent of a rabbit in the weeds that this is the same gun. Although there are still many mysteries about the woman on the stairs below him, though her presence here is no less astonishing to him than it was before, there is nothing supernatural about her. She knows the name Ariel, not because she has been watching from some world beyond this one, not because she is in the dutiful service of some higher force, but simply because she must have been there in the service station when Vess was chatting up the 2 clerks and when, moments later, he killed them. Where she could have been hiding, how he could have overlooked her, why she would feel the need to pursue him, where she got all the courage for this reckless adventure. These are things he can't discern through intuition alone, but now he will have the opportunity to put these questions to her. Lowering his pistol, he steps back into the laundry room, lest she glance up the stairs and see him. His uncharacteristic fear, his eerie perception of oppressive supernatural forces, lifts like a fog from him, and he is amazed by his own brief spasm of gullibility. He, who has no illusions about the nature of existence, he who is so clear-seeing, he who knows the primacy of pure sensation, even he, the most rational of all men, has spooked. He almost laughs at his foolishness and at once puts it out of his mind. The woman must be to the bottom of the stairs by now. He will allow her to explore. After all, for whatever bizarre reasons, this is what she's come here to do. And Bess is curious about her reactions to the things that she discovers. He is having fun again. Once more, the game is on. China reached the bottom of the stairs. The outer wall of mortared stone was to her right. There was nowhere to go in that direction. To her left was a chamber about 10 feet from front to back, and as wide as the house. She moved away from the foot of the stairs into this new space. At one end stood an oil-fired furnace and a large electric water heater. At the other end were tall metal storage cabinets with vent slits in the doors, a workbench, and a tool chest on wheels. Directly ahead, in a concrete block wall, a strange door waited. Click, whoosh. China swung to the right and almost squeezed off a shot before she realized that the sound had come from the furnace, the electric pilot light clicking on, fuel taking flame. Over the sound of the furnace, she was still able to hear the vibrating pipe. Tada-tada-tada. It was fainter here than on the stairs, but still audible. She could barely make out the music from the second-floor bathroom, an inconstant thread of melody, primarily the passages in brass or wailing clarinet. Evidently for soundproofing, the door in the back wall was padded like a theater door in leather green maroon vinyl, divided into quilt-like squares by 8 upholstery nails, with large round heads covered in matching vinyl. The frame was upholstered in the same material. No lock, not even a spring latch, prevented her from proceeding. Putting her hand on the vinyl, China discovered that the padding was even more plush than it appeared to be. As much as 2 inches of foam covered the underlying wood. She gripped the long stainless steel U-shaped handle. When she pulled, the vinyl-encased door softly scraped and squeaked across the upholstery on the jamb. The fit was snug. When the door swung all the way free of the jamb and the seal was broken, there was a faint sound similar to that made when one opened a jar of vacuum-packed peanuts. The door was upholstered on the inside as well. The overall thickness was in excess of 5 inches. Beyond this new threshold lay a 6-foot square chamber with a low ceiling which reminded her of an elevator, except that every surface other than the floor was upholstered. The floor was covered with a rubber mat of the kind used in many restaurant kitchens for the comfort of cooks who worked on their feet for hours at a time. In the dim light from the recessed overhead bulb, she saw that the fabric here wasn't vinyl but gray cotton with a nubbly texture. The strangeness of the place sharpened her fear, yet, at the same time, she was so sure she understood the purpose of the padded vestibule that her stomach rolled with faint nausea. Directly opposite the door that China held open was one more door. It was also padded and set in an upholstered frame. Finally, here were locks. The gray upholstery plumped around 2 heavy-duty brass lock cylinders. She couldn't proceed without keys. Then she noticed a small padded panel overlying the door itself at eye level, perhaps 6 by 10 inches with a knob attached. It was like the sliding panel over the viewport in the solid door of a maximum security prison cell. Tada-tada-tada. The killer seemed to be taking an unusually long shower. On the other hand, China hadn't been in the house more than 3 minutes. Did it just seem longer? If he was having a leisurely scrub, he might not be half done. Tada-tada. She would have preferred to hold open the outer door while she stepped into the vestibule and slid aside the panel to the inner viewport, but the distance was too great. She had to let the door fall shut behind her. The moment that the upholstered door met the upholstered jamb with the whisper squeak of softly braided vinyl, China could no longer hear the vibrating water pipe. The quiet was so profound that even her ragged breathing was barely audible. Under the padding, the walls must have been covered with layers of sound-attenuating insulation. Or perhaps the killer had shut off the shower just as the door had fallen shut and was now toweling dry, or putting on a robe without bothering to towel off on his way downstairs. Fearful, unable to breathe, she opened the door again. Tada-tada-tada. In the rush of water moving at high velocity under pressure, she exhaled explosively with relief. She was still safe. Alright, okay, be cool. Keep moving. Find out if the girl is here and then do what has to be done. Reluctantly, she allowed the door to fall shut. The rattling of the pipe was again sealed out. She felt as though she was suffocating. Perhaps ventilation in the vestibule was inadequate, but it was the sound-deadening effect of the padded walls, at least as much as poor airflow, that made the atmosphere seem as thick as smoke and unbreathable. China slid aside the padded panel on the inner door. Beyond was rose-colored light. The port was fitted with a sturdy screen to protect the viewer from assault by whoever or whatever was within. China put her face to the port and saw a large chamber nearly the size of the living room under which it was situated. In portions of the space, shadows were pulled deep, and the only light came from 3 lamps with fringed fabric shades and pink bulbs that were each putting out about 40 watts. At 2 places along the back wall were panels of red and gold brocade that hung from brass rods as if covering windows, but there could be no windows underground. The brocade was just set dressing to make the room more comfortable. On the wall to the left, barely touched by light, was a large tattered tapestry, a scene of women in long dresses and cloche hats riding horses side saddle through spring grass and flowers past a verdant forest. The furnishings included a plump armchair with antimacassars, a double bed with a white headboard painted with the scene not quite discernible in the rose light, bookcases with acanthus leaf molding, cabinets with mullioned doors, a small dining table with a heavily carved apron, 2 directoire chairs with flower pattern upholstery flanking the table, and a refrigerator. An immense dark-stained armoire featuring crackle-glazed flower appliques on all the door panels was old, but probably not a genuine antique, battered but handsome. A padded vanity bench sat before a makeup table with a triptych mirror and a gilded fluted frame. In a far corner was a toilet and a sink. As weird as this subterranean room was, like a storage vault for the stage furniture from the production of Arsenic and Old Lace, the collection of dolls was by far the strangest thing about it. Kewpie dolls, Cabbage Patch Kids, Raggedy Ann, and numerous other varieties, both old and new. Some more than 3 feet tall, some smaller than a milk carton, were dressed in diapers, snowsuits, elaborate bridal dresses, checkered rompers, cowboy outfits, tennis togs, pajamas, hula skirts, kimonos, clown suits, overalls, nighties, and sailor suits. They filled the bookshelves, peered out through the glass doors of some of the cabinets, perched on the armoire, sat atop the refrigerator, stood and sat on the floor along the walls. Others were piled atop one another in a corner and at the foot of the bed, legs and arms jutting at odd stiff angles, heads cocked as on broken necks like stacks of gaily attired corpses awaiting transport to a crematorium. 200 or 300 or more small faces either glowed in the gentle light or were ghost pale in the shadows, some of bisque and some of china and some of cloth, some wood and some plastic. Their glass, tin, button, cloth, and painted ceramic eyes reflected the light, shone brightly where the dolls were placed near any of the 3 lamps, glowed as moodily as banked coals where they were consigned to the darker corners. For a moment, China was half convinced that these dolls could actually see, except for a few individuals who appeared to be blind behind cataracts of rose light, and that awareness glimmered in their terrible eyes. Although none of them moved or even shifted their gaze, they had an aura of life about them. Their power was uncanny, as though the killer were also a warlock who stole the souls of those he murdered and imprisoned them in these figures. Then, quiet movement in the room, a shadow coming out of gloom, proved to be the captive, and when she stepped into sight, the dolls lost their eerie magic. She was the most beautiful child that China had ever seen, more beautiful even than in the Polaroid snapshot, with straight, lustrous hair that was an enchanting shade of auburn in the peculiar light, though platinum blonde in reality. Fine-boned, slender, graceful, she possessed a beauty that was ethereal, angelic. She seemed to be not a real girl, but an apparition bearing a message about redemption, a manger hope, and a guiding star. She was dressed in black penny loafers, white knee socks, a blue or black skirt, and a short-sleeved white blouse with dark piping on the collar and across the pocket flap, as though she was in the uniform of a parochial school. No doubt the killer provided the girl with the clothes that he wished her to wear, and China saw at once why he would favor outfits like this. Though physically she was undoubtedly 16, she seemed younger when dressed in this fashion. With her slender arms, with her delicate wrists and hands, in this blushing light, the demure uniform made her seem like a child of 11, shy of her confirmation Sunday, naive and innocent. Sociopaths like this man were drawn to beauty and to innocence because they were compelled to defile it. When innocence was stripped away, when beauty was cut and crushed, the malformed beast could at last feel superior to this person he had coveted. After the innocent and the beautiful were left dead and rotting, the world was to some degree made to more closely resemble the killer's interior landscape. The girl sat in the armchair. She was holding a book. She opened it, turned a few pages, and appeared to read. Although she had surely heard the panel sliding back from the viewport in the door, she did not look up. Apparently, she assumed that her visitor was, as always, the eater of spiders. With a rush of emotion that pinched her heart and surprised her with its intensity, China said, "Ariel." The name fell through the port as into an airless void, having carried no distance whatsoever, creating no echo. The girl's cell obviously had been lined with numerous layers of soundproofing, perhaps with even more layers than the vestibule, and all this attention to the containment of her shouts and screams seemed to indicate that from time to time the killer invited people into his home, perhaps to dinner, or to have a few beers and watch a football game. That he would dare such a thing was only one more proof of his outrageous boldness. But that he would have friends at all chilled China. Friends not demented like him, who would be horrified to discover the girl in his cellar, and to know that their host slaughtered whole families for his entertainment. He passed for human in the workaday world. People laughed at his jokes, sought his advice, shared their joys and sorrows with him. Perhaps he attended church. On some Saturday nights did he go dancing, smoothly two-stepping around the floor with a smiling woman in his arms, keeping time to the same music everyone else heard? China raised her voice, "Ariel." The girl failed to look up. Louder still, all but shouting it through the screen port in the padded door, "Ariel!" In the chair, knees primly together, the book in her lap, head bowed to the page, wings of hair hiding most of her face, Ariel sat as if deaf, or as if she were a girl in the back of a closet, tuning out the shouted arguments of drunk and drug-sodden adults, tuning out further and further until she was in a great deep silent place of her own, untouchable. China recalled times as a young girl when simply hiding from her mother and her mother's more dangerous friends had not provided her with a sufficient sense of security. Sometimes the arguments or the celebrations became too violent or too boisterous. The chaos of noise and crazy laughter and cursing spun like a tornado around her, even where she had concealed herself, and her fear spiraled out of control until she thought that her heart would burst or her head explode. Then she went away to more welcoming places in her mind, through the back of the old wardrobe into the land of Narnia, which she had read about in the wonderful books of Mr. C.S. Lewis, or to visit Toad Hall and the Wildwood from the Wind in the Willows, or into realms that she herself invented. She had always been able to come back from those escapements, but on occasion she had thought about how wonderful it would be to stay in that faraway place, where neither her mother nor her mother's kind would ever be able to find her again, no matter how hard they looked. In those exotic kingdoms, there was often danger, but there were also true and faithful friends like none found on this side of magical wardrobes. Now, peering through the screen port at the girl in the chair, China was sure that Ariel had sought refuge in just such a far place and was detached from this sorry world in every way that counted. After a year in this dismal hole, from time to time suffering the attentions of the sociopath upstairs, perhaps she had wandered so far along the road of inner adventure that she could not easily or ever return. In fact, the girl raised her gaze from the book and sat staring neither at China's face in the door port, nor apparently at anything in the room, but it's something in a world twice removed from this one. Even in the inadequate rose light, China could see that Ariel's eyes were out of focus and as strange as the eyes of any of the dolls that surrounded her. The killer had told the men at the service station that he had not yet touched Ariel in that way, and China believed him, because once he had taken her innocence, he would need to smash her beauty, and when that was done, he would kill her. The fact that she was alive argued that she was still untouched. Yet day after day, month after dreadful month, she had lived in exhausting suspense, waiting for the hateful son of a bitch to decide that she was ripe, waiting for his brutal assault, his sour breath on her face, his hot and insistent hands, the terrible irresistible weight of him, every indignity and humiliation. In her single room there had been nowhere to hide. She could not escape to the rooftop, to the beach, to the attic, to the crawl space, to the upper limbs of the tree in the backyard. Ariel. The refuge to which she had escaped might be in the pages of the book that she now held. She functioned in this world, grooming and feeding and bathing and dressing herself, but she lived in some other dimension. China's heart rolled in a sea of sorrow and a storm of rage, and through the port in the upholstered door she said, "I'm here, Ariel, I'm here. You aren't alone anymore." Ariel's gaze didn't shift out of dreams, and she was as still as any of the dolls. "I am your guardian, Ariel. I'll keep you safe." As the girl followed a long and winding road farther into her private elsewhere, her hands relaxed and the book slipped out of them. It slid off the edge of the chair and thumped to the floor, and all except a whisper of the sound was absorbed by the special walls and ceiling. She was not aware of having dropped the volume, and she sat, unmoving. "I'm your guardian," China repeated, and wondered vaguely at her choice of words. She was more afraid for Ariel than for herself, and her heart was racing faster than ever before. Your guardian. Hot tears blurred China's vision, disabling tears, an indulgence she could not afford. She blinked furiously until her eyes were dry and her vision was clear. She turned from the locked inner door and angrily pushed open the outer one. Tata, 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 tata. As she stepped out of the heavy sound baffling of the vestibule and into the first room in the basement, the rattling pipe seemed louder than she remembered. Tata, tata, tata. Perhaps a minute had passed since she'd slid aside the padded panel of the viewport. The son of a bitch bastard freak was still in his shower, naked and defenseless. And now that China knew where Ariel was, she didn't have to worry that the cops would need him to lead them to the girl. The gun felt good in her hand. It felt wonderful in her hand. If she could have freed Ariel and gotten her out of there, she would have done that rather than take the violent option, but she didn't possess the key, and that inner door was not going to be easy to break down. Tata, tata, tata. But she had only one choice. She went to the cellar stairs, blue steel gleaming in her hand. Even if he finished showering, shut off the water before China was able to reach him, he'd still be naked and defenseless, toweling off. So she would go in there into the bathroom and open fire on him point blank, shoot him down, empty the revolver into him, the first shot right through his fucking heart, then put at least one round in his face to be sure that he was really done for, take no chances at all. Use every round, squeeze the trigger until the hammer click, click, clicked on the expended cartridges in a totally empty cylinder. She could do it, kill the crazy freak, kill him over and over again, kill him until he stayed killed. She could do it, would do it. She climbed the steep stairs, treading on wet footprints that she'd left in her descent. China Shepherd no longer hiding, up and out of that hole, untouched, alive, coming out of Narnia forever. Tata, tata, tata. Thinking ahead as she moved, China wondered if she would shoot him through the shower curtain, if that was in fact a curtain instead of a glass door. Because if she didn't shoot him through it, then she would have to hold the revolver in just one hand while she yanked the curtain or the door aside. That would be risky because a strange and dismaying weakness was creeping into her fingers and into her wrists. Her arms were shaking so badly that already she had to grip the weapon with both hands to prevent herself from dropping it. Her heart rattling like the copper pipe, scared about the coming confrontation, even if the crazy geek was naked and defenseless. China reached the upper landing and entered the laundry room. She couldn't shoot him through the curtain because she wouldn't know whether she'd hit him or not. She'd be shooting blind, unable to aim for his chest or head. Past the dryer and the washer, through the fragrance of laundry detergent, she reached the open door to the kitchen. Crossing the threshold, she belatedly registered the important thing that she had seen on the landing at the head of the cellar stairs. Wet shoe prints larger than her own, among her prints, overlapping her prints, where he had stood only a short while ago. She was already rushing into the kitchen with too much momentum to halt, and the killer came at her from the right, past the dinette set. He was big, strong, a juggernaut, neither naked nor defenseless, the shower having been a ruse all along. He was fast, but she was marginally faster. He tried to drive her backward and slam her against the cabinets, but she slid out of the way, raising the revolver with the muzzle 3 feet from his face, and she pulled the trigger, and the hammer made a dry, stick-bearing sound as it fell on an empty chamber. She backed hard into the side of the refrigerator, dislodging the kittens and Lily's calendar, which clattered to the floor at her feet. The killer was still rushing at her. She squeezed the trigger and the revolver clicked again, which made no sense. Shit. Because the clerk in the service station never had a chance to fire it before he'd been blown away by the shotgun, no cartridges should be missing. This was the first time that she'd seen the killer's face. Always before she glimpsed just the back of his head, the top of his skull, the side of his face, but from a distance. He was not what she had expected, not moon-faced and pale-lipped and heavy-jawed. He was handsome with blue eyes that were a beautiful contrast with his dark hair, nothing crazy in his clear eyes, broad, clean features, and a nice smile. Smiling, he continued to come straight at her as she squeezed the trigger a third time, and the hammer fell yet again on an empty chamber. Smiling, he tore the revolver out of her hand with such force that she thought her finger broke before it slipped through the trigger guard, and she squealed in pain. The killer backed away from her, holding the weapon, his eyes sparkling with excitement. What a kick that was. China huddled against the side of the refrigerator, tramping on kitten faces. I knew it was the same gun, he said. But what if I'd been wrong? I'd have one big hole in my face right now, wouldn't I, little lady? Weak and dizzy with terror, she looked around desperately for anything that could be used as a weapon, but there was nothing close at hand. One big hole in my face, he repeated, as if he found the prospect amusing. One of the cabinets might contain knives, but she had no way of knowing which drawer to check. Intense, he said, smiling at the revolver in his hand. A pistol lay on the counter across the kitchen, beside the sink, well out of her reach. China couldn't believe this. He had brought a gun of his own, but he hadn't used it, had set it aside, and had gone for her barehanded instead. You're an attractive woman. Side note, the way Vess is talking to China doesn't seem like the manner in which he usually talks. Like, it seems off somehow. I'm not really sure. It seems weird. Anyway, end of side note. She looked away from the pistol, hoping he hadn't noticed that she'd seen it, but she was fooling herself, and she knew it because he saw everything. He pointed the revolver at her. You were back there in the service station last night. She was gasping for breath, but she didn't seem to be drawing any air. She was breathing too fast and too shallowly, in danger of hyperventilating, and she was furious with herself, furious because he was so calm. He said, I knew you were there, somehow, somewhere, and I know you found this chief special after I left, but for the life of me, I can't figure out why you're here. Maybe she would be able to get to the pistol before he could stop her. It was 1,000,001 chance, 2,000,003. Hell, face it, impossible. From 5 feet away, aiming the revolver at the bridge of her nose, his voice bubbly with exhilaration, the killer said, oh, another side note. All of my books, like, literally almost all of them are, like, filled with blunt resin from just sitting in a car reading and kind of smoking one to the dome. But none of the books that I have now have, like, any resin on any of the pages, and it's really weird. And this one should, because I've read this many, many times. It should be, like, all resined up, like, with blunt resin everywhere, but there's none. Just like in all of the other books here, and it's really weird. It's creeping me out. Anyway, end of side note. From 5 feet away, aiming the revolver at the bridge of her nose, his voice bubbly with exhilaration, the killer said, But even though it was the Asian's piece, I was walking into the mouth of the dragon here. I was lucky just now. Are you? Although reaching the pistol was probably impossible, she didn't have any alternatives, nothing to lose. With a note of impatience, he said, "Honey, listen to me, please. I'm talking to you. Do you feel lucky right now? As lucky as I've been?" Trying not to stare at the pistol, reluctant to look into his two normal eyes, she gazed down at the bore of the revolver and managed to say, "No." And she half believed that she heard that single word echoing back to her out of the barrel. "No." "Let's see if you are." "No." Be adventurous, sweetheart. Let's see if you're lucky," he said, and he pulled the trigger. Although the weapon had failed to fire 3 times, she expected it to explode in her face, because that seemed to be the way luck was running for her, and she flinched. Click. "You are lucky, even more so than I am." China didn't know what he was talking about. She couldn't focus her thoughts on anything but the pistol by the sink, this last miraculous chance. "When Fuji started to pull this piece on me," the killer said, "didn't you hear what I promised him?" All this talking in the bastard's calm demeanor unnerved China even further. She expected him to shoot her, cut her, beat her, and probably rape her. Torture answers from her before or after, but she didn't expect to have to chat with him, for gosh sakes. As if what they had been through was only a pleasant little road trip, a shared vacation that had taken a couple of interesting twists. Still pointing the revolver at her, he said, "What I told Fuji was don't, or I'll shove the bullets up your ass. I always keep my promises, don't you?" His patter finally captured her undivided attention. In such poor light, and with all that blood everywhere, not wanting to look squeamish, she probably didn't see that Fuji's pants were pulled down. He was right. After a glance showed her that the clerks were both dead, she had averted her eyes and stepped around their bodies. He said, "I managed to insert 4 rounds in him." Now she closed her eyes, opened them at once. She didn't want to see him, looming and handsome with his nice smile, dry bloodstains on his clothes, and nothing disturbing in his eyes. But she didn't dare look away. China Shepherd, untouched and alive. "I put 4 bullets in him," he said, "but then they started popping back out, a little post-mortem gas release. It was ridiculous, quite funny really, but I was pressed for time. As you might understand, and finally it was just too much trouble to do the 5th. Maybe this was best, maybe one more round of Russian roulette, and then peace at long last. No more trying to understand why there was so much cruelty in the world when kindness was the easier choice. He said, "This is a 5-shot weapon." The empty socket of the muzzle stared blindly at her, and she wondered if she would see the flash and hear the roar, or whether the blackness in the barrel would become her own blackness without any awareness of the exchange. Then the killer turned the revolver away from her and pulled the trigger. The blast rattled windows, and the slug tore through a cabinet door along the nearest wall, spraying the splinters of pine and shattering dishes inside. Bits of wood were still flying when China grabbed a drawer and yanked it out of the cabinet. It was so heavy that it almost pulled out of her hand, but she was suddenly strong with desperation, and she slung it upward at the killer's head, the contents spilling from it as it arced high toward his brow. It's a long fucking chapter. Spoons, forks, butter knives dueling in the air, flashing with cold fluorescent reflections, ringing down on him and across the tile floor, startling him backward into the dinette table. Even as the killer stumbled away in surprise, China was moving toward the sink. An instant after she heard the empty drawer crash against something, she put her hand on the grip of the pistol. She saw a red dot on the steel frame, which was probably exposed when the safety was off, as on other pistols with which she was familiar, and she didn't have to worry about empty chambers, as with the revolver, because if there was even 1 bullet in the magazine, just 1, it would be in the breech. Please. And at this close range, 1 round might be all that she needed. But her trigger finger was already stiffening and swelling, and when she tried to hook it through the guard, the flare of pain rocked her. She bobbled on a black tide of nausea, swayed, fumbling at the trigger guard with her middle finger. Skating across the littered floor with an ice-brittle clatter-clink of scattering tableware, the killer reached China before she could bring the gun up and turn. He slammed his arm down on hers and trapped her hand against the countertop. Reflexively, her finger pulled the trigger. A bullet smashed the backsplash. Chips of yellow ceramic tile sprayed in her face, and she might have been blinded if she hadn't squeezed her eyes shut in time. He slammed the heel of his hand against the side of her head, sending a spray of darkness across the backs of her eyes, like shards of exploding black glass, and then he clubbed his fist against the nape of her neck. With no memory of having fallen, China was lying on the kitchen floor, with a bug's eye view across the vinyl tile, gazing through a cataclysmic tumble of eating utensils. Interesting. Spoons were the size of shovels, forks as big as pitchforks, knives were lances. The killer's boots, black boots, moving around. For a moment she became confused, thinking that she was back in the Templeton house in the Napa Valley, hiding under the bed in the guest room. But there had been flatware scattered across the bedroom floor, and when she focused on the stainless steel utensils again, her thoughts cleared. Now I'm going to have to wash all these, the killer said, before I put them away. He was circling through the kitchen, picking up the flatware and being methodical about it, keeping spoons with spoons, knives with knives. China was surprised that she could move her arm, which was as heavy as a great tree limb, a petrified tree, once wood but now stone. Nevertheless, she managed to point at the killer and even curl her throbbing trigger finger, swallowing her pain and the bitter taste that came with it. The gun didn't fire. She squeezed the trigger again, and still there was no boom, and then she realized that her hand was empty. She wasn't holding the pistol. Strange. One of the knives was near her hand. It was a table knife with a finely serrated edge, suitable for spreading butter, or for slicing well-cooked chicken, or for cutting green beans into bite-sized pieces, but not ideal for stabbing someone to death. The knife was a knife, however, better than no weapon at all, and she quietly closed her hand around it. Now all she had to do was find the strength to get off the floor. Curiously, she couldn't even lift her head. She had never before felt so tired. She had been hit hard on the back of the neck. She wondered about spinal injury. She refused to weep. She had the knife. The killer came to her, stooped, and extracted the knife from her hand. He was amazed at how easily it slipped from her fingers, even though she clutched it ferociously, as if it hadn't been a knife at all, but a sliver of melting ice. "Bad girl," he said, and wrapped the flat of the blade against the top of her skull. He continued with the cleanup. While trying not to think about spinal injuries, China managed to get her hand around a fork. He returned and took that away from her, too. "No," he said, as though he were training a recalcitrant puppy. "No." "Bastard," she said, dismayed to hear a slur in her voice. "Sticks and stones. Fucking bastard." "Oh, very pretty," he said scornfully. "Shithead. I should wash your mouth out with soap. Asshole." "Your mother never taught you words like that." "You don't know my mother," she said thickly. He hit her again, a hard chop to the side of the neck this time. Then China lay in darkness, listening worriedly to her mother's distant gay laughter and strange men's voices, shattering glass, cursing, thunder and wind, palm trees thrashing in the night over Key West. The quality of the laughter changed, mocking now, crashes that weren't thunder, and the skittery palmetto beetle over her bare legs and across her back. Other times, other places. In the vapory realm of dreams, the iron fist of memory.